No. 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 Yukari could feel Masaki's warmth through her back. No. There was absolutely no way she could sleep when the two of them were sharing a futon. No. Meanwhile, he just snoozed peacefully, giving no indication of whether he was even conscious of Yukari's presence. Masaki is like the least horny person in existence. Awesome. This was the first time Yukari had ever heard a man snoring so close to her. You know what? Big props to Masaki. She'd never even gotten this close to Reiji. All this time I'm giving Masaki shit like, ah, don't do it. And he's like, okay. Just passes the fuck out. Masaki wriggled, his back pressing against Yukari's. That mere action made her stiff as a statue, sending her heart rate skyrocketing. Why? Why am I feeling like this? Yukari curled up into the fetal position. She then scooched away from Masaki. Masaki stirred again. It was then that Yukari noticed she'd hogged the sheets all to herself, wrapping them around her like a cocoon. What should I do? Yukari gingerly flipped over and looked at Masaki. His broad back was there, facing her. Though he was asleep, he was curled up like he was freezing. Yukari wanted to share the blanket with him, but it was far too small. The futon was a single, not a double, so it wasn't made for tending to two simultaneously. Yukari knew what she had to do. However, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Eventually, though, she gulped and steeled herself. She then sat up and threw the blanket over Masaki. After calming herself with a few deep breaths, she cuddled against his back. Now the two of them could share a single blanket. Plus, this would keep them both warm, in theory anyway. Yukari could feel Masaki's heat flooding into her. Is he doing alright? I don't know, homeboy seems to be sleeping just peacefully. His breath no longer sounded labored, at least. That just went to show how bad he had had it earlier. Regardless, the sound of the rain drumming against the roof and the window was now worlds away from Yukari. Next day. Okay, that's a scene transition, not necessarily next day. Okay, bunker girls, gotcha. The three girls passed through the gutter and emerged in the central hall. Haruka knocked on the door built into the wall that sealed off the tunnel, only to get a thud in return. Furthermore, it wouldn't budge no matter how much she and the others pushed and pulled on it. For all they knew, it wasn't even locked. Manami said the door was blocked from the other side. How did the kidnapper bring us here? Asked Iraha. Manami pointed to the ceiling in response. At its center was a gaping round hole similar to a vent. Apparently the kidnapper used a ladder to get down from there. Iraha scanned the hall, wondering if there was any other way out. Haruka pointed to the door next to her own, suggesting maybe there was one in that locked room. Iraha disagreed, saying she didn't expect it to be any different than the rest of the rooms. Haruka approached the door regardless and knocked. However, it didn't open, to no one's surprise. Manami said they'd just have to take the long way and entered one of the unlocked rooms. Nope. Not playing your fucking game. Inside, she picked up her flashlight and crawled into the gutter. Haruka squeezed herself in next, followed by Iraha. The girls passed by Haruka's room and went even further. When they did, the otherwise dry ground suddenly turned into damp mud. It seemed that the soil was exposed from this point onward. Is that where they're gonna find nasty, decomposed girl? Manami removed the lid, shielding the next room. However, putrid miasma assaulted Haruka's senses not even a moment later. The air was so rancid that she had to struggle not to vomit. Manami went through the newly opened hole. Did she not smell that? Moments later, Manami offered Haruka her hand. Haruka really, really did not want to find out what was waiting for them in there. She also knew it was too late to turn back now. Thus she took Manami's hand and climbed up, feeling dirt caking her palm. Okay, I think they're out of the gutter now, so turn sound effects back on. Much like the gutter below, the dirt on the floor of this room appeared to be exposed as well. However, it was far too dark to tell, seeing as how there wasn't even a single light around. And unfortunately, the rank odor was even worse than it had been in the gutter. Manami dragged Haruka over to a wall to keep her from blocking the gutter. Her flashlight swung around the hole leading below, right where her hand was. Haruka pinched her nose and looked around, but couldn't see the source of the smell, much less anything else. Manami then helped bring Iroha up. Haruka could tell Iroha was grimacing even with what little light they had. Manami swung her flashlight around until she'd illuminated the edge of the room. Yup. Haruka shrieked the moment she laid eyes on it. A decomposed body had taken up residence in the room. They could all tell it was dead from a single glance. It still had just enough clothing left to inform the three it had been a girl, much like them. Iroha attempted to approach the body, probably to try and find out more, but Haruka reached out and stopped her. Manami remarked that she had no idea who this girl was, nudged the corpse's head with her foot, and checked its face. When Haruka warned her not to kick the body, even given the circumstances, Manami simply cocked her head and asked why not. It truly looked like she didn't understand what was so wrong about that. Manami went on to explain that they couldn't concern themselves with that if they wanted to get out of here. Though Haruka knew she was right, it just didn't sit well with her. However, Iroha appeared to agree with Manami. She too was of the mind that they had to focus on finding a way out to safety for the time being. Haruka nodded in agreement, all the while silently praying for the deceased girl's soul to rest in peace. Ugh. Anyway, February 21st. Oh? Say yes.
これだけの事件を起こして無期懲役で済むはずがない。
時坂先生。
I am tugging my sleeve.
それは私も疑問に思っていました。ですが、魚住警部も理由を知らないようで。
おそらく贋物制作の腕でしょうね。
Husky looked Say in the eye.
警察か検察かは分かりませんが、どこかの依頼でもあったんじゃないですか。
私が生かされているのはそっちじゃないわ。
Say shrugged.
6年前に傷つけられた間宮心臓の殻の少女の修復を指示されているわ。
I gasped in spite of myself. Say's lips curled into a grin when she noticed.
聞いているわよ。あなたがあの絵に深く。
Bitch, you're lucky there's glass separating us.
それがどうかしたか。
I just barely managed to pull myself together.
別に。ただ私は事実を述べただけ。
Say turned away.
事実を述べてくれるのでしたら。
Husky sees the opportunity to chime in.
何？
笹倉さんの画廊で発見された天罰以外の間宮心臓の絵画。あれは前園さんが描いたものですか。
確かその件については黙秘したはずだけれど。まさきくんはど？
Say flashed us an impish smirk.
前言を翻すようですが、天罰が発見された経緯とあれが前園さんの作であることを考えれば、画廊にあった絵こそが本物ではないかと。
正解。
ちょっと待て。すると何か間宮心臓のアトリエに絵があった時に。
今まで気づかなかったことの方が驚きだわ。
Say laughed. In other words, the ones being displayed at the art museum were the fakes, while the ones in police custody recovered from Sakura's basement were the real McCoys.
なぜいきなり話すつもりになった。
そんなの自分の娘を助けるために決まっているじゃない。そんな取引をしなくても私たちは最善を尽くします。そうだといいけれど。
Say looked away. Seems she really did care about her daughter's safety, in her own way, that is. I could relate, so I didn't dare press any further. Terrasante. Oh, the lights were on. So she's here already, huh? Perfect. Oh, Stella.
ただ
I'm
い
sitting here
ま。
like, who's here?
おかえりレイジ。
Stella's waiting for me right at the front door. She must have heard me pulling up or something.
なあ、ステラ。6年前に間宮心臓の複製された絵が見つかったことがあ
Oh,
っ
you're gonna break the news to her?
うん。結局どっちが本物かわからなかった。
作った本人が証言した。
つまり盗まれてた？
そうなるな。俺たちがアトリエで絵を回収する前に入れ替えられていたようだ。
じゃあやっぱり天罰も偽物？
そういうことだ。
そう。
Stella's shoulders slumped.
なんだか残念そうだな。
うん。あの絵は心臓の新境地だったと思ってたから。
新境地。
うん。各対象に抱いていた感情が編集ではないように思えたから。
Admiration, huh? That was probably what Seimazono had felt for Sora. Or was it? Just what was her view of her sister? Was it not obsession with an armless angel? Whatever it was, I didn't plan on asking her to find out. Bunker girls, alright. I just hear those first few notes and I'm like, alright, bunker girl time. Haruka and Ira dozed off as they huddled together in Manami's room. Meanwhile, Manami herself sat against a nearby wall, nodding off. None of them had any idea what time it was due to the lack of a clock. They didn't even know how many days they'd been down here. Haruka raised her head as she listened to Ira's muted snoring. Wait, what's that sound? Haruka subconsciously recalled the decomposed corpse they all had the misfortune of seeing. No way. That body's not moving, is it? Ira opened her eyes and looked up at Haruka. Manami, awake and alert, closed the door and pressed her ear against it. Haruka tiptoed over to her as not making a sound. He's back, whispered Manami, gesturing to the light bulb string dangling from the ceiling. Ira got up and pulled it. Their world transformed into an obsidian realm of darkness just moments later. Haruka quietly called and reached out to her friend, finding her before long. Manami widened the door a crack and beckoned the two of them over. They then saw a circle on the floor of the central hall. Didn't take long for Haruka to realize it was light from the hole in the ceiling. Is he coming down from there? Wondered Haruka aloud. And indeed, something descended from the ceiling shortly thereafter. It was a cord. No, a rope ladder. Ira suggested they could escape by climbing up it, but Manami quickly nixed the idea. It turned out the rope ladder didn't stretch too far down from the ceiling. While it wasn't so high up that an adult couldn't take hold of it, none of the three girls were quite that tall, unfortunately. The rope ladder swayed back and forth. Just then, a foot emerged from the hole. So that's the kidnapper, whispered Haruka. To her dismay, there wasn't enough light to make out any of his features. Haruka could at least tell he was an adult, though. The man set something atop the nearby table just then. It was probably the bread they got every day. Ira shivered when Manami suggested that it could be poisoned. The man then turned the opposite way, his back to the girls. Haruka wondered what he was doing. As it turned out, he was in fact heading to the room with the corpse they'd found earlier. He produced a key, unlocked the door, and went in. Haruka tugged on Manami's sleeve as a sudden fear struck her. She was concerned about what would happen if the man checked her and Ira's rooms only to find them missing. However, Manami rustled her hair and told her there was no need to worry. I doubt it'll come to that, she said. Ira asked her why that was. In response, a peevish Manami explained that he'd have no reason to come looking for them. Haruka started to suggest it was because he assumed they were trapped down there when Manami suddenly covered her mouth. The man emerged from the room, dragging a large blanket with him. Haruka quickly realized that was the girl's corpse. She looked away as the gruesome sight from before returned to the forefront of her mind. Apparently, the man was taking the body with him. Haruka snuck another peek outside the door. He was now tying some sort of thick cord around the blanket. Seemed that was how he was planning to haul the body back up. Once he was set, the man grabbed the edge of the ladder and climbed up. Shortly after he vanished into the hole in the ceiling, the blanket started rising in concert with the sound of the cord being tugged. The body curled like a shrimp. It ascended higher and higher until it eventually disappeared into the hole like an angel returning to heaven. And then, once they heard the lid shut, the girls finally left the room and turned the lights on. Iroha took a deep breath. Manami remarked that this meant the place wouldn't get any smellier. She peeked into the unoccupied room to confirm it truly was devoid of life, not that there'd been any life in there to begin with, before picking the bread basket off the table. Within were 3 rolls of bread and the standard thermoses. The girls were all hungry. However, Haruka wasn't quite so eager to take the bread without question this time around. Iroha timidly wondered if it was poisoned. Manami said she didn't know, then took a roll and sniffed it. Suddenly, she clapped her hands. She then suggested they play rock, paper, scissors for fairness' sake, with the winner of each round getting to pick which roll of bread they ate. Though Haruka understood the logic, it didn't sit right with her. Iroha proposed they eat their bread as they would normally. Her idea was that if they checked the bread rolls one by one for poison, it'd lessen the risk. However, Manami said that wouldn't be enough, then broke a roll in 2. Just looked like ordinary bread to Haruka. So ordinary, in fact, that she'd probably have no problems eating it under normal circumstances. However, she wasn't brave enough to risk it. Manami then held out her fist between herself and the others. And at her count, they began playing rock, paper, scissors. Iroha ultimately emerged as the first winner after several rounds. She stared at her own hand in surprise as Manami congratulated her and set the basket down. Iroha froze for a moment when she saw the bread within it. But in the end, she nervously took the roll Manami had broken in half. However, her hand still shook like crazy, even though she probably figured that was the safest one. Haruka opened the thermoses and checked what was in them just in case. Seemed they had been served milk today. Ugh. Eventually, Iroha steeled herself and took a bite. Haruka timidly observed her face. Her friend chewed the bread, eyes welling with tears. Haruka heaved a massive sigh of relief when Iroha said she didn't think it was poisoned. Manami then urged Haruka to continue the game. Though still scared, Haruka went along with it. Several rounds later, Manami emerged as the victor. No. Don't tell me Haruka gets poisoned again. She casually picked up one of the 2 remaining rolls and took a bite. Seemed that one hadn't been poisoned either. Manami then encouraged Haruka to take the last one. However, neither Iroha nor Manami's had been poisoned, so if any of them were, this would be it. Iroha reassured her that she didn't think that guaranteed to be poison, but her words fell on deaf ears. Why don't you crack it open like the other 2 did? The bread quivered in Haruka's hands. Reluctantly, she broke it in half. She didn't see anything inside it. In fact, it smelled somewhat fresh, causing her stomach to roar once more. Haruka burst into tears. She was hungry. So hungry that she could hardly take it. Eventually, those primal instincts won over, forcing her to take a bite. It tasted sweet. No, not just sweet. Good. Nothing bitter or sour in it at all. Haruka wept as a wave of relief washed over her. Concerned Iroha presented her with a thermos of milk. Haruka thanked her and took a sip. Coursed through her body as though she'd bitten into the juiciest fruit in the world. I guess he didn't poison any of them today then, the calm and collected Manami remarked. However, Iroha suggested that they could have handled that situation a whole lot better. Yeah, they could have broken up all the bread rolls and each had a half. Yeah, exactly. But Manami countered that could kill them all. What? That instead they should keep losses to a minimum. A stormy atmosphere hung between the 2 girls. Manami stomped over to Iroha, but Haruka grabbed her arm. What the fuck? We shouldn't be fighting. When faced with a disgruntled Manami, Haruka told her that they needed to get along since they were friends. And though even Haruka herself didn't feel like she'd made a convincing argument, Manami cooled her head and backed off, surprisingly enough. It's almost like the word friends had struck a chord with her. In any case, there was nothing wrong with their food. However, they knew that didn't mean the same could be said for sure about their next meal. How many girls did they rescue that first time around? Did one... I don't remember. Because I'm starting to think, like, did one of them not make it out? Because already there's tensions boiling between, what was it, Iroha and Manami? So, like, did they get into a tussle and someone gets a bit too violent? Got a call while I was enjoying breakfast with Stella at home. I held out my hand just as Stella started to get up, then answered the phone. Sure am.
Stella, 悪いが出かけてくる。
わかってる。お部屋片付けておくから。
悪いな。
スケベな本はちり紙交換に出しとくから。
それは勘弁してくれ。というか、そんな本ないだろ。
春画があった。
Old wooden block porn? Please don't throw those out. They're strictly for academic research, I swear. Not the old wooden block porn.
は、目撃情報が出ました。昨晩9時頃にこの穴のそばに背の高い男がいたそうです。
昨日の9時か。
あとは男は白い服を着ていたと話しています。車のライトに照らされてよく見えたそうです。
Interesting. Hold the phone. A tall man in white?
おい、魚住。
あ？
黒やな。
I am answered before I could. Alright. She's seen him before
そ
too.
の可能性は高い。
Wait. Oh no, don't tell me.
容貌や見た目の年齢も目撃者から聞き出しておいてくれ。
了解しました。
The investigator nodded and went back the way he came.
時坂先生、
It was then I even noticed I was hanging my head.
具合が悪いのですか？
黒谷直里がこの件の犯人だと仮定した場合。
Her, wouldn't it? The body had been far too decomposed for me to even make out what she looked like. Even if it hadn't been, it'd still been 6 years since we'd last met. So, I wouldn't have recognized her even if I saw her.
おい、レイジ！
Rosemi violently jostled my shoulders, catching my attention.
てめえの心配していることにはならねえだろうよ。この仏は身長や足の大きさからして10。
Meanwhile, she had to be about 6 or 7.
そうだな。
Please let him be right.
でだ。もし黒谷直里が近くにいたとして、奴がこの事件を起こすものか？
No.
住居は引き払っていますから、近所ということは関係ないと思いますが、
Rosemi and I moved carried on without me.
先生はどうお考えですか？
No. Ganari could I be the culprit? No.
不可能。
That's dumb.
正確には不必要と考えていいだろうな。
True. There would have been no point in dumping them outside if they'd been hidden successfully somewhere else all these months. Not for a fugitive on the run, at least.
では、昨晩目撃された人物というのは、
はっきりとした情報が集まらなければな。
We need more information from the witness, just like Rosemi had said.
さてと。
That out of the way, I resumed reviewing my notebook.
前回の事件と
Muskie was summoned to the Chofu station by Areji.
来たか。
Doji beckoned him over on site upon his arrival.
事件があったようですね。
前の続きじゃないかと言われているようだな。
Muskie poured over the report Doji
現
handed
場で
him.
直りが目撃されている。
まだ本人だと断定はされてないそうだな。
Doji shook her head after Muskie's own shot up. Toji shook her head after Muskie's own shot up in surprise.
今は目撃証言の裏取り中だ。
時坂さんは
あいつは別の場所を調べている。お前は夜8時過ぎに合流してくれたそうだ。
Tonight? Why, is something going on then? Oh well, I can worry about that later. It's still hours
こ
away.
ちらは何をすればいいんですか？
目撃証言を事実だと踏まえ、
Logically, that made sense, seeing as the police couldn't afford to ignore this potential lead. However,
直りが犯人だとは思えないな。
Muskie shook his head after he'd finished perusing the report.
捜査陣もそう考えているようだな。
逃亡中にそんな事件を起こさないということもあるけれど、意味がないような気がする。
意味？
Toji raised an eyebrow.
さらって監禁し殺す理由です。彼はいくつか事件を起こしているけれど、
That was Muskie's impression of him, at least. Even Roshiki's murders were backed with justifications, insane ones, but still following a set logic all the same.
それに彼は昔言いました。子供たちを救いたいと。
それを信じているのか。
Toji breathed a quiet sigh.
時坂もそうなのだろうな。だが指名手配されているのは確かなのだから、一刻も早く身柄を確保すべきだろう。
ええ、分かっています。
Muskie and Toji visited the apartment complex yet again. A horde of uniformed police officers were also present.
この辺りに防空壕のようなものはないようだな。 個人宅の地下室まではわからんが、
協力者などがいれば可能性は広がりますが、それだったら自分で遺体を捨てに行かないでしょうね。
典型会の関係者が潜伏していることも考えられるが、そのあたりのことは前に調べたのだろう。
ええ、6年前に典型会の信者を調べた時にはこの辺りに住んでいる人はいませんでした。
That said, it had been years, so it wouldn't be odd if one or two of them had moved here
そ
since.
れと白い服、典型会の装束で目撃されたというのは腑に落ちません。聞き込みでも白い服を着ていたというのは出てきていませんし。
In other words, it was possible this had been someone disguised as Naori.
お前は犯人が別にいると考えているようだな。
Told you scanned Mosky with the eyes of a hawk.
怪しいのは確かですが、決定的な証拠はまだ出てきていません。それに彼がこんな殺人を犯す意味がない。
信じているのか。
時坂さんもそうだと思いますよ。
Otherwise, you'd have no reason to believe the girl Naori had taken off with was still safe and sound.
たまたま黒や直りがいたところで事件が起こったとでも言うつもりか。
Yeah,
関連性が見つけ出せない限りそうとしか思えません。
that said, Mosky didn't believe this was all mere coincidence himself.
それでも黒や直りを早く見つけなければならないのは。
そうですね。
Oh, this is a new song for the Bunker Girls. Okay. Yura and Haruka were curled up under a blanket. Having nothing but the clothes on their backs to protect themselves against the dropping temperature had proven too rough. What's more, there was only so much stamina they could conserve on a diet of only one bread roll per day. Meanwhile, Manami sat on the bed, wearing a ratty old coat meant for adults. She asked what month it was. Though Haruka's sense of time had been completely kaput, still didn't feel like it had been too long since she'd been brought here, so she answered with February. Manami got up, commented that it meant it wouldn't get warmer anytime soon, then left the room. Yura turned to Haruka, her eyes still shut. Seemed she was curious about where Manami was going. Haruka figured she'd gone to the bathroom. There was a partition and a hole in the corner of the central hall where they could take care of their business. Manami returned not too long after that. Haruka and Yura rose to their feet when she informed them that she found the other rooms were now unlocked. Furthermore, she also discovered futons in the room they hadn't been able to get into thus far. With those, they stand a better chance of keeping warm and staving off the winter's cold. The girls left the room. They headed to the door. Why did the fucking vibe shift all of a sudden? They headed to the door at the end of the hall that had been previously locked until now, where Manami was waiting. According to her, the futons in there weren't soggy, meaning the room was probably dry. Haruka looked inside to find a room that was much cleaner than the others. Not only was there a wooden frame for a bed, there were even futons in a pile, just like Manami had stated. Manami claimed the room for herself. Neither Haruka nor Iraha minded, though. It seemed the room Iraha had initially awoken in had also been unlocked, so Haruka and Iraha took futons for themselves and went there. First thing they did was clean up the books littering the place. The girls set their futons in a pile and started arranging the books across the floor. Fortunately, they were all too advanced for the girls to understand. So much so that neither would have any qualms with burning them if there had been a fireplace or something around. Suddenly, Ira voiced a question as they were lining up the books. Specifically, she wondered when the room had been unlocked. When Haruka answered that the kidnapper could only have done it when he'd come down the other day, Ira pointed out that he'd never gotten close to the door. The man had entered through the ceiling, set down the basket of bread, unlocked the door with the body behind it, and gone back up. Not once had he stopped by this room. As such, how the door had been unlocked still remained a mystery. Haruka suggested that it might have been that way from the start, but Ira shot that idea down. After all, she tried to get through the door many times herself, only to fail, forcing her to escape through the gutter. Manami then came over and suggested the kidnapper had done it when they were sleeping. She mentioned that she'd heard sounds herself just last night. Though Haruka was shocked to learn the kidnapper had paid them another visit, she was mostly just glad he hadn't done anything to them. Ira wondered again why the kidnapper would go to the trouble of unlocking the doors. Manami shrugged and made a joke about how maybe he'd forgotten to get futons. She then went back to her room. I don't fucking trust Manami. Haruka had no more of an answer than either girl, but Ira just kept coming up with question after question now that she'd gotten started. First of all, she wondered why the kidnapper would leave the bread on the table in the hall if she planned on keeping them locked in their rooms. One possibility was that he'd been planning on delivering food to their rooms each time, just like how Ira had found bread already in her room when she'd first woken up. Suddenly, she shuddered after recounting that. Apparently, she remembered how her bread back then had something like poison in it, too. Haruka shivered, too, remembering that horrible stinging on her tongue from not too long ago. Yora continued by explaining that she had no idea what the culprit was hoping to gain from any of this. Haruka suggested that it might be ransom money. She remembered how there had been a famous kidnapping just last year that prompted plenty of warnings from the grown-ups in her life. Thinking of that made Haruka ponder just how worried her disappearance must have been making them. She wanted to go home and see them again as soon as possible. However, the only way to do that would be to beat up the kidnapper. It was with that thought in mind that she picked up the length of timber that was sitting in the corner of the room. However, it was quite heavy. Even Haruka could tell that walloping someone with it would be impossible for someone her size. Yura then suggested they set a trap. One idea she had was moving the table in the central hall under the hole and breaking off one of its legs. However, Manami came back and told them she'd already tried that. Unfortunately, it failed. The kidnapper had stopped bringing the ladder down low enough for Manami to reach ever since. As such, she said they needed to figure out something that was guaranteed to succeed. Haruka picked up that moment to chime in and go back to her earlier suggestion, saying that hurting the man would be too risky, even if it was to escape. After all, it was possible he'd fly into a rage and harm them in retaliation. But Manami remained undaunted, saying it was either them or him. Okay. I don't know, Manami seems kind of suspicious, I'm not gonna lie. More bunker girl. Oh no. You're going to Moon World?
Say goodbye to rainy days and sad days. The morning sunshine and on my heart. I've no fears. I can do anything with you.
Moon World. Duh. It had been 2 decades since that cafe first opened its doors near Kichijoji Station. It originally belonged to Kyoko's husband, but she'd taken over after he passed away. Though not easy, she still managed to scrape by on her own after all these years. However, it was not uncommon for her to consider settling down and spending her life with someone special. Oh? Is Big Man gonna make the move?
あら、お帰りなさい。
She could tell it was him simply by the way he'd entered. He always opened the door a little too aggressively, only to subsequently close it slowly. It was the perfect metaphor for his personality.
Ooh.
Ozumi was terse as per routine. As per said routine, he sat at the same stool.
いつものとなんか食うものをくれ。
ええ、まだお仕事が残ってるの？
Kyoko asked as she brewed Ozumi some coffee.
ああ、すぐに戻らにゃなら。
Ozumi grabbed the sugar
大
bowl.
福くらいしかないけれど、それでもいい？
ああ。
Kyoko took a plate out of the cupboard behind her after Ozumi gave her the green light. She found 2 sweetened rice cakes and served them both to Ozumi after some thought.
悪いな。お前さんの晩飯じゃなかったのか。
晩ご飯は別できちんといただくわよ。
All she had to whet her appetite at the cafe were snacks, though she was considering cutting down on them these days. Ozumi filled his coffee with sugar as per routine.
忙しいの？
まあな。
He took a large bite out of a rice cake and drank some coffee.
現状が調布の方なんでな。
でも近くで事件が起こると。
Kyoko legitimately meant that. While Kichijoji was peaceful now, she still remembered all the chaos and conflicts in the area back when the black market had been just next door in the 40s.
心配いらねえよ。
Ozumi's voice had been so quiet that Kyoko barely even got it. He'll protect you.
なんだ。俺が守って。
Yeah, good man. Ozumi immediately gulped down his coffee and lowered his head after saying that.
ああ、あれだ。今回の件が片付いたら時間が取れるから、その時話したいことがある。
え、今じゃいけないの？
Nope.
まあな。
Ozumi kept refusing to look Kyoko in the eye. Don't worry, take your time, big man. However, she had an idea of what he was getting at. They'd been together 6 years now, so she'd been thinking it was a good time as ever herself.
じゃあ待ってるわ。
Yeah. One last case, he's gonna pop the question. Let's go, big man. You got this. You finally managed to get going steady with her. You've got a whole 6 years. Incredibly admirable, I might say. Ozumi nodded stiffly and left the cafe. Okay, before I heard Kyoko's voice line, I'm like, did Wozumi just say he? What the fuck? Kyoko grinned to herself. She polished off the rice cakes he'd left behind and started cleaning the place. The vibes are always immaculate at Moonworld. Except that one time when she got stabbed. That wasn't as immaculate. Back to the bunker girls, okay. Haruka woke up to a sound in the distance. It was one that had come from outside the room, and one she recognized. Haruka gently rocked Ira awake as the latter slept in a blanket next to her. Ira woke up and drowsily looked Haruka's way. After she sat up straight, once Haruka told her that she'd heard the hole in the ceiling open. Is that man back? Haruka figured they should check it out despite the risks involved. Ira looked around for Manami. Manami had been spending all her time in the unlocked room where she and Ira had first met. It was almost like she wasn't afraid of the kidnapper. That, or she knew there was no point hiding from him when he already had a key. Well, that's the thing. One of the missing girls was, Akiyuki's daughter, right? So, if that's her dad and she's got no fear of him, Ira got up and approached the door. Haruka thought she was leaving at first, but that wasn't the case. Instead, she merely opened the door a peep and kept an eye on the central hall. Haruka watched on, remaining where she sat. Ira then told her no person nor ladder had come down. That's weird. Was I just hearing things? Haruka started to worry she was going crazy. Oh, that's right, because the brother, Sei's brother, right? He was like snooping around, but he eventually ends up at the base of that hill, right? That's where Reiji finds him. But still, at first he does go to their house. But I don't think he ever finds the... Well, maybe he does find the hole, but he realizes he's got no way of getting down there? Well, no. No, that's why he goes to the front doors, because he thinks that's the way in there. Because when Reiji goes into the hole, he notices the rope ladder nearby. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the ceiling resounded. However, no one showed up no matter how long Haruka and Iraha waited. Two of them were behind a door. As such, they had no way of seeing the hole in the ceiling at present. Suddenly the door opened from the outside, revealing Manami. She stood in the doorway, clutching the edge of the door, giving the girls a bemused look. Haruka brought her index finger to her lips, telling her about the sound they'd heard. Manami looked up at the ceiling as if to suggest she hadn't heard anything herself. Haruka urgently tugged on Manami's sleeve in an attempt to urge her to hide, but the latter didn't budge. Instead, she shook off Haruka's grip and marched away. She then went directly under the hole in the ceiling. All of a sudden, she stopped and crouched down. Curious as to what happened, Haruka left the room as well. Manami turned around, now carrying a basket held up by a string on its handle. Said the kidnapper must have dropped it. However, there was nothing in it, not even bread. Yet I wonder if that meant he couldn't come down anymore. Oh, good. That means we'll be in less danger. It means you're not getting food. Haruka heaved a sigh of relief. However, Manami frowned in befuddlement, wondering aloud if something had happened on the surface. Don't start eating each other. Don't start trying to eat each other. Please don't start trying to eat each other. Okay. So apparently this is where like some like completely brand new shit happens. So this is after, we investigate there's like something that goes down at the Nautico residence. We discover the hole, right? Well, no, this isn't when we've discovered the hole. This is where like Mosky looks at the map. They're trying to like discover like how do they get into the shelter. That's right. And Mosky's like, oh, check the barn. Haruka lay in the dusty underground room. Though her blanket was damp, it was the only means to stave off the cold that she had. And today was the coldest it'd been by far. Haruka sniffed and shivered. Though the room was freezing, she felt like she was burning up. Just then, someone set a cold cloth across her forehead. It was Iraha, hovering over her best friend. She asked Haruka if she was okay, but Haruka just put on a brave face and said she was fine. Though the cloth had been soaked in muddy water, she was still grateful for the temporary respite from the heat. Haruka's chest throbbed in pain every time she coughed. Ira's visage warped with concern as she tenderly offered Haruka her hand. Haruka feebly attempted to push Ira away, not wanting the latter to catch her cold. Undaunted, Ira gingerly wrapped her hands around Haruka's. Haruka could tell Ira was also trembling, though whether from the cold or fear, she had no idea. Ayo. Suddenly Ira's stomach rumbled. Yeah, they haven't gotten food. They still had no idea how long they'd been down here. Haruka had figured they were getting bread about once a day. However, they hadn't gotten any recently. What's more, she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Might have been before she developed a fever, but she wasn't sure anymore. Ira rose to her feet, deciding to check if any food had arrived since. Though she knew that had to be done, Haruka found the thought of being alone disheartening all the same. However, Ira gave her hand another tight squeeze as if she'd picked up on that sentiment. She promised Haruka she'd be right back, then left the room. When she did, it suddenly got very quiet. To make matters worse, Haruka was having trouble seeing due to her fever. It only served to feed the void of despair consuming her heart. Haruka called for the mother she'd never met, even without realizing it. And by the time she did, it was too late to stop herself. Tears gushed out of her eyes. Haruka covered her face and stifled her sobs. She knew she couldn't give Ira and Manami more to worry about on top of everything else, not when her fever was already burdening them as it was. Haruka continued weeping as she wiped her tears. She didn't want the other girls knowing about her moment of weakness. But now that the dam had burst open, there was no holding back her tears. She threw the blanket over her head and bawled her eyes out. All of a sudden, she felt a hand caressing her head through the blanket. It was Iraha. Haruka gulped before slowly poking her head out of the blanket. Iraha looked to be on the verge of tears herself. Haruka covered her face again, still not wanting her best friend to see how red her eyes had gotten. However, that changed after she heard Manami mention something was happening up above. Iraha looked up at the ceiling. Manami closed the door, saying she'd heard strangers' voices. Apparently they'd opened the hole and had taken a look down it. Manami knew because she'd seen light from a flashlight. Haruka fought through the dense haze that shrouded her brain and barely managed to ask if they were coming down. Manami replied that it was possible and suggested they hide, keeping the door open a crack. Haruka staggered to her feet. Iraha tugged her sleeve, insisting she rest. However, Haruka couldn't sit still. She'd be completely helpless were she caught resting in the event something bad was about to happen after all. Manami helped Haruka up, claimed they had to be ready to run at any moment. She wanted to say she was sure these intruders had come to kill them. Her reasoning was that it was a different person than usual, one who believed them pests that need to be exterminated. Haruka's vision grew murkier. Iro suggested they might have come to help, but Manami shook her head, saying no help would find them here. She then urged her two cellmates to help her come up with a plan to get rid of the newcomers. The place was so small that these intruders would find them in no time if they stayed put. Therefore, they had to make the first strike before it was too late. Manami picked up a squared timber sitting on the floor. She tried handing the moldy piece of wood to Haruka, instructing her to strike the intruders from behind. Haruka instinctively took a step back. In response, Manami reprimanded her and forced the block into her hands. Haruka just hung and shook her head, claiming she couldn't do it. I'll do it. And with those words, Iraha reached for the block. Though her voice was shaky, she still argued that Haruka should sit this one out on account of her sickness. Manami nodded, saying she had a point. Thus, Iraha picked up the block. Manami urged to get into position before it was too late, inciting a nervous Iraha to leave the room. Once she was gone, Manami crouched down in front of the door and started gathering rocks, or rather debris and broken concrete that littered the floor. What are you doing? Asked Haruka as she leaned against the wall, feeling worse than ever now that she'd gotten worked up from all the talk they'd had. Going to hit him with these, explained Manami as she flicked her wrist. Haruka ducked on instinct after a small chunk of concrete crashed into the wall right next to her head. Manami explained that all adults flinched when they were hit in the face. If they were lucky enough, she might even blind some of them. All with an innocent smile on her face. Haruka then suggested the possibility that Ira might have been right. This really was simply someone coming to rescue them. Those words sent Manami into a frenzy. She pelted Haruka with stones as she shouted that no one was coming to help them, driving Haruka to cover her head. Some of the stones hit Haruka's arms, but fortunately she was barely hurt thanks to the blanket shielding her body. Manami then griped about having to pick up the stones all over again as she crouched down and did exactly that. Haruka shivered from head to toe. Yeah, Manami sucks shit. Not just because of the cold or her fever either.